I used to believe that family was everything. They were the people you could rely on, the ones who would have your back no matter what. But as time went on, I started to see things differently. What I once thought was trust and love turned out to be a web of lies and hidden darkness. There are certain people in our lives who wear the mask of kindness so well, you can't help but believe in their good intentions. But sometimes, the people who should protect us are the very ones who lead us into harm's way. It's not always easy to see it at first. Maybe it's a relative who always seems a little too eager to help, or one who insists on getting involved in your personal affairs. At first, you dismiss it, thinking they're just being caring or concerned. But as the days go by, little things start to feel off. You begin to notice strange patterns in their behavior, things that don't add up, things that don't sit right in your gut. You start questioning if you're just overthinking it, but deep down, you know something's wrong. And when you finally piece it all together, it's too late. The mask falls off, revealing the sinister truth beneath. It was hard for me to accept. The people I trusted most in the world, the people I thought would never hurt me, were the ones who caused the most pain. These weren't strangers. These were family. And that made it worse. The betrayal hurt more because I never thought it was possible for someone I loved to hurt me so deeply. But I've learned that sometimes the ones you trust the most can also be the ones who will bring you to your breaking point. In this video, I'll share with you the chilling stories of relatives who you shouldn't trust, those who took advantage of their position in the family, and the horrifying truths that were uncovered too late. These stories may remind you of people in your own life, relatives who seem kind, but you've always felt something wasn't quite right. I wish I had listened to my instincts earlier. Maybe I could have avoided the worst of it. But now, I can only warn you. Trusting the wrong relative can change everything. Let me take you through these stories. And remember, sometimes the scariest monsters wear the face of family. I'll never forget the first time I met my Uncle John. I was just a kid, around 10 or 11 years old, when he showed up at our house for the first time. My parents had been talking about him for years, but we'd never seen him before. Apparently, he'd been off living somewhere far away, doing who knows what. My mom always mentioned him with a mix of caution and respect, like he was a mystery they couldn't fully figure out, but one they still felt obliged to accept into the family. I didn't understand any of that back then. I just thought he was another uncle, another guy to hang out with when he came around. When he arrived, I remember the atmosphere in the house shifting immediately. There was something unsettling about him that I couldn't quite put my finger on. He had this way of looking at people, like he was studying them, and when he spoke, his voice was smooth and calm, but too smooth, almost like he was practicing it in front of a mirror. He seemed polite, even kind, but there was something in his eyes, a coldness that lingered behind the pleasantries. It was the kind of coldness you only find in people who have seen too much or who have a way of hiding their true intentions. At first, my parents didn't notice it. They were just happy he was finally home, and they welcomed him with open arms. But I, being the curious child I was, couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I remember asking my mom once why we never saw him around before, and she just shrugged, offering a vague answer about his travels and business. But there was no real explanation, no real reason why we'd gone all those years without hearing from him. As the days passed, my Uncle John started to blend into our family routine. He would stay up late, always talking to my parents in hushed tones. He seemed to know everything about our family, about the places we'd lived, the things we'd done, even details I didn't think anyone outside our home could know. Sometimes, when I was walking by the living room, I would overhear bits of their conversations, fragments of stories that felt like they didn't belong. My mom would laugh nervously, but there was a hint of discomfort in her voice when she spoke with him. My dad, on the other hand, seemed completely at ease. Too at ease, like he had known this man for years. But something about the way Uncle John looked at me made me uneasy. He would always smile, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He never said anything directly to me, but there was always that unspoken tension when we were in the same room. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen, looking for a snack, when I caught him rummaging through my parents' personal things in the hallway. He was standing near the coat closet, a spot where my mom kept some of her old sentimental items, letters, keepsakes, things we never really used. I watched him for a moment, unsure of whether to say something or just go about my business. He looked over his shoulder, catching my gaze, and that's when I noticed the look in his eyes. He didn't seem surprised to see me. In fact, it was almost as if he had been waiting for me to come around. His smile was slow and deliberate, like he was trying to hide something. "Found something interesting?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He straightened up quickly, closing the door to the closet. "Just looking for something of your mother's," he said, his voice calm. But I could tell there was a hint of nervousness behind his words. "Oh," I said, still unsure of what to make of the situation. "You can ask her for it, you know." He chuckled softly, a sound that didn't quite feel genuine. "No need. I prefer to do things my way." I nodded, backing away slowly, and he turned back toward the hallway, his posture suddenly tense. That was the first time I felt something wasn't right. Something about the way he'd looked at me. Something hidden in that forced smile. But I pushed it out of my mind. After all, he was family. It had to be fine, right? Days turned into weeks, and my unease grew with each passing moment. Uncle John's presence was like a shadow in the house, always looming, always there, but never fully present. He would disappear for hours at a time, only to reappear with vague explanations of where he'd been. Long drives, business meetings, late-night walks. Sometimes I could hear him whispering to my parents in the other room, but it was never clear what they were talking about. One evening, I decided to follow him. I had a feeling, an instinct, that something wasn't right. He had slipped out of the house again, but this time, I decided to keep track of him. It was a quiet night, and the streets were empty. I kept my distance, not wanting him to notice I was following him. Uncle John walked with purpose, as though he had somewhere important to be, though he didn't seem to be in any particular hurry. After a while, he turned into a small, dimly lit alleyway, behind a building I didn't recognize. I was cautious but determined to know what he was up to. I waited until he was out of sight, then followed him down the alley. The sounds of my footsteps echoed off the brick walls, but I tried to remain as quiet as possible. I wasn't sure why I was so afraid, but the sense of dread was overwhelming. I could feel my heart racing in my chest as I turned the corner, only to find the alley empty. There were no signs of Uncle John. He had disappeared. I stood there for a long moment trying to make sense of it. Was it just my imagination? Had I followed the wrong person? But then I heard it. A low, muffled voice. I couldn't make out the words, but I could tell someone was talking. It was coming from behind a dumpster. I crept closer, my stomach twisting with anxiety. As I peered around the corner, I saw him, Uncle John, standing there in the shadows, talking to someone. But this time, it wasn't just anyone. He was talking to a man I didn't recognize. Someone with a rough, menacing appearance. They were exchanging something, though I couldn't see what it was. I could only catch glimpses of their faces in the dim light. My heart pounded in my chest, and I realized I had seen enough. It was clear now. Whatever Uncle John was involved in, it wasn't something good. He was hiding something. Something that had nothing to do with family. And everything to do with secrets that shouldn't be kept. I turned and ran back to the house, my mind spinning. When I got home, I couldn't shake the image of Uncle John in the alley, his secretive dealings hidden in the darkness. From that moment on, I couldn't trust him. But I also knew that my parents wouldn't believe me. They had already let their guard down, and Uncle John was already part of the family again. No one seemed to notice the danger he posed, and even though I tried to stay away, to keep my distance, I knew that Uncle John's true nature would eventually be revealed. It wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. And when that day came, everything I had believed about family, trust, and love would be shattered forever. It wasn't long after Uncle John's unsettling presence in our lives that my Aunt Clara arrived. I had heard stories about her, stories from my mom, whispered conversations I overheard in the kitchen when I was younger, just snippets of things I didn't fully understand. But I always knew Aunt Clara was different. She was the kind of person who commanded attention without saying a word, whose mere presence made the room feel heavier, like the air thickened whenever she entered. My mom, on more than one occasion, had warned me to be careful around her, but as a kid, I didn't understand why. After all, Aunt Clara had the kind of charm that could make anyone feel special. She had a smile that could light up a room, a laugh that seemed to ease every tension. To most, she was the epitome of grace and warmth, but I saw through it. At least, I thought I did. The first time I met her properly, I was about 12. My parents had invited her to stay for a few weeks, and as soon as she arrived, I could tell something was off. She was beautiful, striking in a way that made you want to be near her. But there was something about her eyes that unsettled me. Sharp, calculating, always scanning the room like she was sizing up her next move. I remember watching her interact with my parents. How easily she slipped into conversations. How effortlessly she inserted herself into our family's affairs. She was never rude, never overtly manipulative, but there was a subtlety to her behavior that I couldn't ignore. It was in the way she would comment on things. Little remarks that seemed innocent at first, but later I realized were not. I could see it in my mom's eyes as the days passed, this growing sense of unease. It was like Aunt Clara had this power over her, this ability to manipulate her emotions, to make her feel small or insignificant without ever raising her voice. I often overheard their conversations late at night. My mom's voice tight with frustration, but Aunt Clara's was always calm, soothing, like a lullaby that lulled everyone into a false sense of security. One evening, I stayed up later than usual, curious about what was going on between them. I had learned not to trust Aunt Clara, but my parents didn't seem to notice anything wrong. So I decided to keep an ear open. From my bedroom, I could hear the soft murmur of their voices coming from the living room. I crept down the hallway, careful not to make a sound. What I overheard shook me to my core. Aunt Clara, I'm just not sure about this. My mom's voice sounded strained. I've been feeling so lost lately. I don't know what's wrong with me. It's okay, dear. Aunt Clara's voice was like velvet, smooth and comforting. You're just going through a rough patch. But sometimes you need to make hard choices for the sake of your happiness. You deserve to be happy, don't you? I do, but I feel guilty, like I'm neglecting everyone. Your brother? He needs me and the kids. Oh, don't worry about them. They'll be fine. You've done enough. It's time to focus on yourself. You deserve it. You've worked so hard, but sometimes people need to step back and breathe. If you don't put yourself first, no one else will. I didn't hear my mom's reply, but I could feel the tension building. Aunt Clara always knew what to say. She had this uncanny ability to make people feel like they were in the wrong, like they were the ones who needed fixing. And my mom, being so vulnerable at that moment, was easy prey. Aunt Clara would tell her what she needed to hear, things that seemed comforting, but always with an undercurrent of manipulation. Every word she spoke subtly chipped away at my mom's confidence, feeding her insecurities until she was just a shell of the woman I once knew. The next day, my mom started acting different. It wasn't overt at first, but I could see it. She was quieter, more withdrawn. Her laughter seemed forced, and her smiles didn't reach her eyes anymore. It was like she was slowly being consumed by something, by someone. Aunt Clara had wrapped her around her finger, and she was pulling her deeper into whatever plan she had. I didn't know what it was yet, but I could feel it brewing in the air. Something dark, something dangerous. It didn't take long for things to escalate. One evening, my mom came into my room, sitting on the edge of my bed. She looked exhausted, the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I think I've made a mistake." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart starting to race. "What's going on, Mom?" I've been thinking a lot about what Clara said, about how I need to focus on myself. I think I've been putting too much of myself into taking care of everyone else. And maybe she's right. Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. My mom had always been the strong one, the one who held the family together. But now, she was crumbling under Aunt Clara's influence, fallen into the trap that Clara had set for her. I didn't know what Aunt Clara's ultimate goal was, but I knew she was slowly dismantling my family from the inside out. Things got worse from there. Aunt Clara started suggesting that my mom should take a break, go away for a while, leave the house and the family behind. She told her it was a vacation, a time to recharge, but I could see through it. It wasn't a vacation. It was a way to isolate my mom from the rest of us, a way to pull her further into her control. And as much as I tried to warn my mom, to tell her that something wasn't right, she wouldn't listen. Aunt Clara had planted the seed of doubt in her mind, and now my mom was too far gone to see the truth. One night, I decided to confront Aunt Clara. I couldn't sit back and watch her destroy my family. I found her alone in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine. She looked up as I entered, a sly smile curling at the corners of her lips. She knew what was coming. "What's wrong, dear?" she asked, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Is everything okay?" "No, Aunt Clara," I said, my voice shaking with frustration. "What are you doing to my mom? Why are you making her feel like she has to leave us? Why are you turning her against us?" She didn't flinch. She didn't seem surprised at all. In fact, she seemed almost pleased by my outburst, like she had been waiting for it. "I'm just helping her," she said softly, taking a sip of her wine. "Your mother has been through so much. She needs someone to guide her. Someone who understands what she's going through." "You're not helping her. You're manipulating her," I snapped. "You're using her when she's at her weakest." Aunt Clara's smile never wavered. "Oh, my dear, you're so young. You don't understand how the world works. People need help. And sometimes they don't realize it until someone like me comes along to show them the way. Your mother will thank me one day. You'll see." I stood there, my hands clenched into fists, my chest tight with anger and fear. She was playing some kind of game, and my mom was the pawn. But Aunt Clara wasn't just manipulating my mom. She was manipulating all of us, slowly, quietly, pulling us apart one thread at a time. And I realized then that no matter how much I tried to fight it, I couldn't stop her. She had already won. I wish I could say I did something to stop it, something to save my mom from the web Aunt Clara had spun. But I didn't. And now, looking back, I wonder if it was too late. Aunt Clara's grip on my mom had become so tight, so suffocating, that by the time I understood the full extent of her manipulation, it was already too late. Aunt Clara didn't need to shout or raise her voice. She didn't need to demand anything. She simply wove her words like a spider spins its web. And one by one, my family walked right into it. By the time my cousin Jason came into the picture, things had already spiraled out of control. He was the last person I ever expected to be part of the chaos. But as it often happens with people like him, he slithered in when least expected. Jason was always the charmer, the one who could talk his way out of any situation, the one with a smile so disarming that you'd almost forget he had a hidden agenda. We had grown up together, but he was never someone I trusted completely. There was always something off about him, something that didn't sit right, even when we were kids. I had chalked it up to his natural charisma and tendency to be the center of attention. He could get anyone to like him, even if he didn't deserve it. But when he returned to town as an adult, I realized just how much of a manipulator he had become. Jason came back to live with us, under the guise of needing a fresh start. My mom, ever the kind soul, offered him a place to stay, thinking it would help him get back on his feet after some unspecified trouble he'd gotten into. It didn't take long for me to realize that his return was no coincidence. There was something more at play here, something sinister lurking behind his carefully crafted persona. At first, everything seemed fine. He helped around the house, played the perfect guest, and told stories that made everyone laugh. His humor was infectious, and before long, Aunt Clara had taken a liking to him as well. I watched them interact in the living room one evening, and the way they exchanged knowing glances made my stomach churn. It was as if they had formed some kind of unspoken alliance. That was when I started paying closer attention. I couldn't shake the feeling that Jason was getting too comfortable. He began showing up uninvited at family events, constantly inserting himself into situations where he didn't belong. And what disturbed me the most was how easily he manipulated my parents into believing his every word. I'd catch him whispering in my mom's ear, offering advice that always seemed to steer her toward decisions that were off, subtle but effective. It didn't take long for him to start working his magic on me as well. One afternoon, when we were alone in the kitchen, he approached me with that same disarming smile. "You know," he said, leaning against the counter, "I've always admired you. You've got a good head on your shoulders. But I think there's something you don't see. You're too attached to this place, to these people. They're not as trustworthy as you think." I stiffened. "What are you talking about?" He shrugged casually, as if it were no big deal. "Just think about it. You've been around long enough to see the cracks. Your mom, Aunt Clara, they're not exactly who they appear to be. They've got secrets, man. And you're stuck in the middle of it, acting like everything's fine. But it's not." My heart pounded in my chest as I processed his words. I'd always felt like something wasn't right, but hearing him say it out loud, it was unsettling. "You don't know what you're talking about," I muttered, but I couldn't shake the unease creeping up my spine. Jason's smile widened. "Maybe I do, or maybe I'm just trying to help you see the truth. Think about it, man. You're a smart guy. You've got a future ahead of you. Don't let these people hold you back. Don't let them keep you in the dark." I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to dismiss him, tell him he was full of it. But another part of me, one I wasn't proud of, began to wonder if there was some truth in his words. Jason had a way of planting seeds of doubt, and I had to admit, it was starting to work. Over the following weeks, I watched him worm his way deeper into the fabric of our family. His charm was his weapon, and he used it with deadly precision. He would always turn up at the most opportune times, inserting himself into conversations, offering advice, always just a little too eager to help. He knew exactly when to show up and when to disappear, playing the role of the caring cousin when anyone was around, but I knew better. He was always watching, always waiting for the right moment to strike. The more I observed him, the more I realized how masterfully he played the game. He had everyone wrapped around his finger, from my mom to Aunt Clara, and even my dad, who usually wasn't so easily swayed. But it wasn't just his charm that worried me. It was the way he seemed to be drawing them into a web, weaving threads of doubt and confusion, slowly pulling everyone into his orbit. One evening, my mom invited me to join them for dinner, and as I sat at the table, I could see the shift in the atmosphere. Jason was in the middle of telling one of his adventures, some wild story about a business venture gone wrong. But the way Aunt Clara hung on his every word, the way my mom laughed a little too loudly at his jokes, it was all too much. They were under his spell, and I could see the power he had over them. I leaned back in my chair, watching them, feeling a chill crawl down my spine. This wasn't just family bonding. This was something darker. This was manipulation at its finest. After dinner, I decided to follow Jason. I needed to know what he was up to. I didn't trust him, and I was determined to figure out what his game was. I quietly followed him out into the yard, where he was standing by the old oak tree, his phone pressed to his ear. "I don't care if it takes longer," he said into the phone. "I'll get what I need. They'll trust me. They already do." I froze in my tracks, my heart pounding. Who was he talking to? And what did he mean by getting what he needed? As if sensing my presence, Jason turned, his face breaking into that same charming smile. Hey, didn't know you were there. What's up? I forced a smile. Nothing. Just wondering what you were up to. He chuckled, but there was something in his eyes that didn't quite match his carefree tone. Just handling some business, you know. Always something to deal with, but it's all good. Don't worry about me. Go enjoy your night. I didn't respond, didn't trust myself to speak. But in that moment, I knew something was horribly wrong. Jason wasn't just a charming cousin. He was playing a long game, and I was starting to fear the worst. The next day, I confronted my mom. You need to be careful with Jason, I warned her. He's not what he seems. He's using you, using all of us. But she just shook her head, dismissing my concerns as typical paranoia. Oh, Jason's fine. He's just going through a rough patch. He means well, you'll see. But I knew better. I knew that I was right, that Jason had a plan, and we were all unknowingly playing our parts in it. But what was his endgame? What was he after? I wasn't sure yet, but I was going to find out. As time passed, my suspicions about Jason deepened. It wasn't just the conversations or the little things I noticed. It was the overwhelming sense of dread that followed his every move. I watched him like a hawk, tracing his steps, questioning every word, every action. But it seemed like no one else saw it. My mom, Aunt Clara, and even my dad. Everyone was so absorbed in his charm, so willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. It all came to a head one evening when Jason decided to host a family gathering. He insisted it would be a way for everyone to reconnect, for old wounds to heal, and for us to put the past behind us. I wasn't convinced, but I didn't have a choice. I had to attend. The evening started out innocently enough, with laughter and food, just like any other family gathering. But there was something different in the air. A subtle shift that I couldn't ignore. As the night wore on, I saw it. The way Jason subtly turned everyone against each other. His manipulations were more blatant now, no longer hidden behind the veil of charm. He planted seeds of doubt in Aunt Clara's mind about my mom's decisions, whispered to my dad about my mom's overbearing nature, and even tried to divide me from my own parents. But it was when I overheard him talking to Aunt Clara in the corner that everything clicked into place. You don't have to worry about her, Jason was saying in that low, coaxing voice. She's too emotional. I'll make sure the house is in good hands. You know I always look out for you. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. My blood ran cold as I realized what he was really after. He wasn't just manipulating us for the sake of control. He was setting up a path for himself, one where he would take over everything. The house, the money, our lives. He wanted it all. When I confronted him about it, he merely laughed, his smile more sinister than ever. You really think they'll believe you over me? He sneered. I'm family, remember? They trust me. You're just paranoid. But I wasn't paranoid. I was right. That night I stayed awake plotting my next move. I couldn't let him win. I couldn't let him tear our family apart. So, I decided to gather proof. I secretly recorded a conversation between him and Aunt Clara, the one where he openly talked about his plans. It was chilling to hear him lay out his strategy, but it gave me the ammunition I needed to expose him. The next morning, I played the recording for my parents. The look of shock on their faces was enough to send a wave of relief through me. They finally saw Jason for what he truly was. But even then, he tried to manipulate his way out of it. He denied everything, of course, but the evidence was undeniable. The game was up. Jason was asked to leave, and though he protested and tried to charm his way back in, it was too late. The damage had been done, but at least the worst of it was over. He disappeared from our lives as quickly as he had come, leaving behind only the wreckage of his manipulation. Looking back, I realize how close we came to losing everything. If I hadn't trusted my instincts, if I hadn't been vigilant, we might have fallen under his control completely. It was a terrifying experience, but in the end, it taught me something important. Trust your gut, even when everyone around you tells you you're wrong. Not all family is family in the truest sense. Some are just opportunists, waiting to strike when you least expect it. It's been months since Jason left, but I can still feel the weight of his presence lingering. I'm more cautious now, more aware of the people I let into my life. Family isn't just about blood. It's about trust, respect, and love. And when those things are broken, there's no coming back from it. I'll never forget the lesson I learned during this time. The people you love the most can sometimes be the ones who will hurt you the most. But that doesn't mean you should stop trusting people. It just means you need to be more careful, more discerning. It's hard to let go of the belief that family will always have your back. But sometimes, the truth is darker than we're willing to admit. In the end, I'm thankful for the strength I found within myself to fight back, to protect my family from the person who wanted to destroy it all. But I'll never forget what I learned from Jason. Trust must be earned, not given freely. And some relatives, they're better left in the past.